I am Dr. Muhammad Asif Amir. Dear students, I welcome you in ISP, Department of English. I hope all is well on your side at this critical and turbulent time of human history. These online classes have been arranged by ISP in order to save your precious time. I am going to teach you discourse analysis, and it is an introductory lecture about this component of course. And today our topic is Introduction to Discourse Analysis, and I will also introduce some of its basic assumptions. But before that, I want to point out that you are MPhil students, and it is a research-oriented degree. And discourse analysis has vast potential to be used as an area of research. So I want your attention and focus about this component of course, because it will help you later on. Now we start our class, and first I would give you the outlines of today's class. First, I would give you definitions of certain terms which are very relevant and important for discourse analysis. Then we will start with the studying of similarities and differences between text and discourse, and I would give you a review of discourse analysis. So now we start with the definition of certain terms which are very important for discourse analysis, and the first one is text. We are using this term in our daily life, and what is actual definition of text? A written form of communication, information, non-interactive in nature. So the first feature of text is that it is in written form and it communicates something, or it imparts some information. But there is another quality or feature of text, and that is it is non-interactive. It means that it is not the interaction between two persons, a number of persons, but it is just in written form and it just imparts some kind of information. Then the other definition is very important, and that is discourse. A piece of communication, written or spoken, interactive in nature. Language in use can also be called discourse. So it is also a piece of communication like text, number one. But the difference is that text is always written, but it can be written or spoken. The second difference is that it is interactive in nature, whereas the text was non-interactive. And we can say that language in use means, and we can take an example, that two persons are involved in the process of conversation and they are using language during this conversation. So whatever they are saying, whatever they are interchanging, and they are using language in that interchange of ideas, that will be called discourse. So these two definitions are actually the base of what we are learning further in this component. Now, whatever we have defined, now we are going to make the difference between these two terms. Some of these differences are similarities we have already noted, but once again, text, it is written, whereas discourse, it may be written or spoken, it may be visual, even it is audio. The feature of text is non-interactive, whereas discourse is interactive, and this is what we have noted in the definitions of text and discourse as well. So there are some other things that differentiate both these terms. In text, agent is non-significant, means the author, the person who has written that text, he or she is of no significance. He or she might have some significance, but when we see text in comparison with discourse, then this agent becomes non-significant. Whereas in discourse, the agent is very much significant. The person who is speaking, the person who is saying something, who is expressing some idea, is very important, because later on we would see that we would note who is saying something, what is said by whom, whether the person or the agent who is saying something, expressing some idea, is male or female, for example, literate or illiterate, because that these qualities of that agent would make us not only differentiate between the discourses, but it will help us and it will give us direction in the analysis of discourse, whereas in text it is of no significance. Now, in text, message is coded in the text. For example, we may take an example of an advertisement, and that advertisement, let us say, is of shampoo. So if we are just reading the text of that advertisement, then the message is coded in that text about the shampoo. For example, they have introduced their product, that is shampoo, then they may give the qualities of that shampoo. So they have coded the message about shampoo in the text. Whereas in discourse, there is interpersonal activity. It is an activity between two persons or among more than two persons. So it is the exchange of ideas. The text is very much orderly. It is in written form, and we see that the written form of language is always orderly, then formally regulated. It is a controlled kind of piece of writing because author is controlling something. Whereas in discourse, it is a piece of speech and people are involved and are participating in some kind of dialogue. So we know that in spoken form it is not orderly and it is not firmly regulated. It is very spontaneous. The text is static. It is not dynamic. And a reader follows the thought process of the author. It means that text has authorial control and reader has to follow whatever the author is thinking. And reader cannot intrude, no interference from the outside. Discourse is an oral process and the concept of speaker and hearer is involved in discourse. Then what could be the examples of text and discourse? Documents are the examples of text. Then reports, for example, a market report, a report about some market, that is an example of text. Street signs, names of streets, number of streets, these are the examples of text. Dialogues, pieces of conversations and interactions, these are the examples of discourse. So I hope that now the difference between text and discourse will be very much clear for you. Now we are going to define another important term, and that is context. Context is also very important in the process of discourse analysis. Now, what is context? Context is just a form of knowledge of the world. So whatever our experience, social experience in this world is, that becomes the background of our personality, or that becomes the context. And through that knowledge of the world, this is the knowledge of the world that enables us to understand many things. So it works as a context. Another definition and a bit detailed one is by Wittgenstein. Those aspects of the circumstance of the acted language. Now, acted language is language in use, keep in mind. Those aspects of the circumstance of the acted language use which are taken as relevant to meaning. So there are so many aspects. Language in use, for example, two people are involved and they are exchanging dialogue. So this is the circumstance of language in use. But there are other aspects which are very important for creating meaning, and these aspects are the context, because without context it would not be possible for these two persons to understand each other. Then context is a schematic construct. The achievement of pragmatic meaning is a matter of matching up the linguistic elements of the code with the schematic element of the context. So, once again, there are two things that we must understand. One is the linguistic elements. And what are those linguistic elements? These are, for example, the words, the sentences which are being uttered by those two persons who are involved in some kind of conversation. These are the words and sentences. And what is the second one which we are referring to? That is the schematic element of the context. So, when the linguistic elements, that is the words and the sentences, would match with this context, then some kind of pragmatic meaning would be generated. If the linguistic elements and this schematic element of the context would not match, it would not be possible for those two persons to understand each other. So now I think we should take an example in order to make it easier for you to understand context. Now listen to me. I am going to take an example, and that would make the meaning of context clearer. There is a conversation in some home between the mother and the daughter. I'm just giving a very simple kind of example. The mother asks, "Has the milkman come?" This is the question from the mother. I repeat, "Has the milkman come?" And the daughter answers, "It is not the azan of Maghrib still." Now, what is the question? Has the milkman come? And the answer from the daughter is, it is not the azan of Maghrib still. So this is not the answer of the question that mother is demanding. She is asking, has the milkman come? And the daughter is telling her about the time of azan of Maghrib. And then there is complete silence in the home. It means whatever the daughter was saying was understood by the mother. But a third person like you and me would be perplexed. That mother is asking about the milkman and the daughter is answering that still there is no azan of Maghrib. So why we are perplexed? Because we do not know about the context and why the mother has understood whatever the daughter was saying, because there is a situational context between the mother and the daughter. And the milkman always comes after the azan of Maghrib. But the third person, like you and me, does not understand this context. So that is why we cannot understand what was going on between the mother and the daughter. So you can see that if there is context between two persons or number of persons, then it is easier to understand what kind of dialogue or conversation is going on between those persons. So context is very important for the analysis of discourse. Now we go to the types of context. There could be three types of context. Number one, linguistic context. This is the context within a discourse, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. So there is always a kind of context. We are not now still discussing it at the level of discourse, but at least we can discuss it at the level of sentences. For example, if we use second form of the verb in the first sentence, then we have to use the same form of the verb in the second sentence. It means that the form of the verb being used in the first sentence is actually controlling the form of the verb used in the second sentence. So this is the context within the sentences. Similarly, we know that there are so many connections between the paragraphs, and those connections are actually create the context. Then situational context, and it consists of environment, time, and speech. For example, the example of the mother and the daughter has this situational context. They are living in the same home, same environment, in same time. So that is why they are understanding, and the context is already there between these two persons. So this is called situational context, and there are so many things and so many dialogues which are not understandable for third, fourth person, but when there is situational context between the persons or among the persons, then these things can be easily understood. Then cultural context. Now it is between different cultures, or same cultures, customs, and background. For example, if two persons are in the process of exchange of dialogues and they have same cultures, then it would be easier for them to understand each other. If they belong to the same background, then there are so many things which are understandable and matching between them, and that will create a kind of context. For example, if two people and they are involved in a dialogue, they are in the process of conversation, and both are Muslims, then a context is already there between them. But in a situation which does not belong to the same culture, then there might be difficulties, problems in understanding each other. So what is the significance of context? Context is so important that we can say that without context, it is impossible to analyze the discourse. So no context means no discourse. So context is of such importance for the analysis of discourse. Now we move to the next step, and that is discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is, as we have defined discourse, as language in use for communication. This is discourse. And search for what gives discourse coherence is called discourse analysis. So again, as we were discussing the context, and we were discussing that there is something involved among the sentences and phrases and paragraphs. Actually, whatever we are searching between the paragraphs and sentences and phrases, that is the coherence. And this coherence, the search for this coherence is called discourse analysis. For example, we have taken the example of the sentences and the form of the verb. So that form of verb is actually the piece of coherence, or that cohesive device. Now there is a very brief history of discourse analysis. The scholars of Greece and Rome separated language into grammar and rhetoric. So they have separated the language according to two functions. Grammar was the rules which were controlling the language, and for effective communication, that was a different function of the language. They were using rhetoric. In 20th century linguistics, there have been approaches which studied language in its full context as part of society and the world. So once again, they were moving towards this discourse analysis, because now they were trying to study language in its context, and study of language in use in its context is known as discourse analysis. So who was the person using the term of discourse analysis for the first time? It was Willig Harris who coined this term in 1952, the term of discourse analysis. Now we need to look beyond the formal rules operating within sentences in order to understand what it is that gives stretches of language unity and meaning. This is the cohesion. We need to search for that cohesion. There are some formal rules which operate within the sentences, and there are some rules which operate beyond the sentences. We have to look for those rules which are giving those stretches of language unity as well as meaning. It means that there are two ways of approaching language. One is contextual and other is formal. Contextual refers to facts outside the language, and formal referring to facts inside language. There are some elements of language and there are elements outside the language. The elements outside the language are called contextual, and within the language or inside the language are called formal. Now we come to exercises. Today we have learned some terms. We have learned the difference between the text and discourse. Then there is a very special and important term, and that is context. Then we have also studied the discourse analysis. What is discourse analysis? Its brief history, how we can analyze the discourse. So these are the two questions that you have to prepare, and you have to send the soft copy of these questions to me. You can have my email address from ISP, You can also contact me on telephone, WhatsApp, SMS, whatever is convenient to you. And these exercises are based upon this lesson, and hopefully it will not be difficult for you to solve them if even you look at this lecture and this lesson. What is the difference between text and discourse? And the second one is, what is context? What are the types of context? Hopefully you will send me these exercises, the solution of these exercises, as early as possible. Now this comes to the end of our today's lesson. Khuda Hafiz. Stay safe.